Was the waltz even a thing in Mozart's time? And if so, where are they? If you're a classical music nerd like myself, you'd probably come up with either of these two answers. Waltzes didn't exist back then, or they did, but they were named different. Either way, you'd be correct. In this video, we'll explore what the forerunner of the waltz was like, the so-called German dance or Deutsche Tanz, and why the term waltz might be misleading in the context of 18th century music. Let's get to it. Speaking of waltzes in the 18th century is somewhat problematic. The term waltz or Waltz derives from the German Weizen, which literally means spinning. At that time, twirls were a central feature in many popular dances from German-speaking regions, and the verb Weizen was generically applied to any of them. This makes early reports of the Waltz in the 1740s and 50s extremely ambiguous, especially because they lack any further description regarding how it was danced and what kind of music it was danced to. The standardization of the term waltz to describe a concrete music and choreography didn't happen until the very end of the 18th century, and even then, the name seems to have been more consistent in England than in the German-speaking regions. The 19th century Viennese waltz, as we know it today, evolved from these early types of waltzes, but the stylistic transition from the Deutsche Tanz to the Viennese waltz happened gradually during Beethoven's lifetime. And it's significant that the term waltz didn't appear in his works until the 1820s at the very end of his life. The main problem with the label Deutscher Tanz, also known as Deutsche or Deutsche, is that it encompassed different types of music and choreographies. Sometimes it was used to refer to a very specific type of dance, the forerunner of the 19th century Viennese waltz, which Eric McGee calls the Deutsche Waltz. Many other times though, Deutsche Tanz was used as a generic tag that included a whole family of partner dances in triple time, the Strasburger, the Langhaus and, depending on the source, the Ländler. Strasburger and Langhaus refer to different dancing styles, but both of them could be danced to the same exact music as the Deutsche Waltz. The difference, according to the sources, is that the Strasburger was a much quieter style of dancing, often performed in a circle at the same time as the Deutsche Waltz, while the Langhaus was the sped-up version. The Langhaus was danced so fast that many people consider it unhealthy, and it was banned multiple times in Vienna by the turn of the 19th century, which, of course, means that people still danced it anyways. To complicate things even further, Deutsche Tanz was a direct translation from the French Allemande, which was the name given in France to a whole different family of dances related to the contredance that imitated the German dancing style. Unlike the actual German dances, which were in triple time, the French Allemande was usually written in double time, but both shared the characteristic twirls and close holds that were considered scandalous at that time. Accustomed to the discretion of the minuet, the close physical contact required for these types of dances was regarded by the French upper classes as rude and unsophisticated, or in other words, German. By the end of the 18th century, the term Allemand had been resignified in the German-speaking regions and turned into a symbol of cultural pride. Unfortunately, we don't know much about how the Deutsche Waltz was danced in Mozart's time, but we do have a lot of surviving music sources. For instance, 49 German dances by Mozart and 83 by Joseph Haydn. As we shall see later, the popular German dances were normally contrasted with the more sophisticated minuet, but the musical differences between them might not be so obvious to the modern ears. For instance, the signature accompaniment of the 19th century Viennese waltz, the famous Papa pattern, wasn't much used before the 1800s. There are a few passages where Mozart employs it though. For the most part, the accompaniments of the German dances and the minuets were essentially interchangeable. So how can we tell the difference between the minuet and the Deutsche Tanz? The first obvious difference was the tempo. German dances were supposed to be played faster than the minuet. However, the lack of metronome marks before the 19th century leaves this matter in the hands of the conductor for modern recordings, which is a question we'll talk about later in this video. With regard to specific musical traits, I have identified 3 key elements that may help to distinguish the minuet from the German dance. First, anacrustic dotted rhythms. Strongly associated with the French music, they appear often in Mozart's minuets, but never in his German dances. On the other hand, when German dances present dotted rhythms, they always start on the strong beat in a similar fashion as the Siciliana. Second, cadences. There are 2 types of cadences that are especially common in Mozart's German dances. I named them the 6/8 notes cadence and the 4/8 notes cadence. The 6/8 notes cadence always displays the following rhythm. This type of cadence was so characteristic that Mozart includes it even in themes that could still work without it. And this is what Mozart actually did. The 4/8 notes cadence presents this rhythmic pattern. Third, bars grouping. Minuets always follow a clear 2 bars grouping pattern or hypermeter, because that's the length of the basic step unit of this dance, the so-called pas de minuet. In German dances, however, the bar grouping is not so consistent. While most of the time the melodies are built in the same way as in the minuet, there are also passages built by irregular grouping or repetitions of single bar units. The following example is the most extreme case, with one single bar repeated a total of 6 times before the final cadence. Another musical trait in Mozart's German dances that foreshadows common procedures in the 19th century waltz is the presence of syncopated rhythms. And the hemiola, which is the temporal displacement of the metrical perception from triple to dipole meter. The form in Mozart's German dances is very similar to his minuets, usually sets of 6 or 12 dances, each of them structured as a rounded binary form with trio. The major exception to this is the group of German dances K509. Unlike the rest of his German dances, which were all composed in Vienna, the K509 was composed in Prague, soon after Mozart's famous Prague Symphony was premiered there in 1787, and this may explain why this work displays some unique stylistic traits compared to the rest. There are 2 major formal differences between Mozart's German dances and minuets. First, every part of each individual German dance may be built as either rounded binary form or simple binary form, while in minuets only the first option is used consistently. And second, unlike minuets, German dances usually display a final coda. Codas in Mozart are strikingly similar to those by Johann Strauss and Lana around 40 years later. They usually present three parts: a fanfare-like beginning that leads to a fermata, a central section in which a previously heard dance is quoted, and a finale, which is usually played faster and displays a series of tonic pedals and energetic cadences. With regard to instrumentation, there are no major differences between Mozart's German dances and minuets, as both were performed in the same places and by the same orchestras. The woodwind section usually consisted of two flutes, one of which could eventually switch to the piccolo flute if needed, two oboes, two clarinets, and two bassoons. These instruments could appear in different combinations, but usually not all of them at the same time. With regard to the brass section, the most stable instrument was the pair of natural horns. Trumpets were added along timpani only in some specific works, usually in the keys of C, D, and E flat. The string section in Mozart's dances differs from other kinds of orchestral works, as they only display two violin parts and double bass. The absence of cellos in the scores arises some performative questions, as we know that these instruments were available in the dance halls where Mozart's music was usually played. The violas, on the other hand, not only were missing from the scores, but apparently they were also missing from the ballroom orchestras altogether.
So we're all prepared 10 viola jokes.
The Ländler originated as a popular dance in the Upper Austria region, and it was played by itinerant musicians in the taverns along the Danube River. Choreographies involved a wide variety of steps, including foot stomping and hand clapping, and the standard ensemble usually employed two violins and a small three-strings bass called Bessettel. The music of the Ländler was played slower than the other German dances, and it displayed some highly characteristic features such as arpeggiated melodies, voice crossing between the violins, and overall very simple harmonic progressions. This makes the Ländler the epitome of what Eric Mackey calls the artless simplicity of the German dances. In the 1780s, stylized versions of the Ländler for orchestra started to be danced in the cities, and they quickly became a cliché of the idealized Upper Austria pastoral within the wider group of the pastorale music topics. Composers like Mozart or Haydn not only published their own sets of Ländlers, but they also combined the Ländler topic within other types of dances, usually as a form of contrast in the trio section. The Ländler became out of fashion as ballroom dance by the beginning of the 19th century, but some of its features remained as recognizable stylistic marks in other musical contexts. Let's take, for instance, the waltz from the first act of Der Freischütz, the famous Singspiel by Carl Maria von Weber. In the original score, this scene is marked as Waltz. The question is, what kind of Waltz? This is one of those cases where tempo reconstruction makes a big difference, because the musical traits and the pastoral context of the work suggest that the composer was probably evoking the Ländler. The following is a slower version conducted by Leopold Ludwig. Let's compare it to an actual Ländler by Mozart. In order to understand why each dance had its own social connotations, it's good to know where they were danced and by whom. In the city of Vienna, public balls could take place in three main types of locations. First, court balls. Court balls were semi-private events held at palace for the royal family and nobility. At special occasions, such as royal weddings, the doors would be open too for those who could afford an entry ticket, but only as spectators. Court balls always started with one or more minuets, which were danced by one single couple at a time. The minuet was the symbol of the ruling power, characterized by its grace and sophistication. The next one was the English country dance, also known as country dance or English dance, which was very popular in Vienna among the middle classes. The English country dance was a group dance which required a very precise coordination under the direction of a master of ceremonies. It's likely that Mozart's country dances and other related dances such as the quadrille or the cotillon were composed for this kind of semi-private events, as they were usually avoided in bigger spaces. Second, imperial balls. Imperial balls were held at a very specific location, the two ballrooms or Redutensaal of the Hofburg Palace. From 1772, imperial balls were open for everyone who could pay the price, no matter their social status. Since everyone was allowed to dance, the nobility, who also attended these events, usually stayed as spectators in order to avoid physical contact with lower classes. As was customary, the imperial balls started with the minuets, but this time with no limits regarding the number of couples dancing it at the same time. During the ball, every hour of minuets alternated with 1 hour of German dances and Ländlers, the new sensations in Vienna. Imperial balls took place mainly during the carnival season from 6th January to Ash Wednesday, which is 46 days before Easter, and it was the only place in Vienna where masks were allowed. During that span of time, up to 3 balls were held every week, lasting from 9 p.m. to 3 or 5 in the morning depending on the day, creating a huge demand for printed dance music. It is usually assumed that Mozart's contributions to the imperial ballrooms were due to his obligations as Kurkammermusicus from 1787. However, many other composers found writing music for the Redutensaal a very profitable activity that involved so little effort compared to other musical genres. For instance, in 1792, Joseph Haydn sold a set of minuets and German dances for the sum of 24 ducats, which is more than what Beethoven got for his first symphony. And third, other minor dance venues. In principle, any establishment that served food was allowed to host dances, but only on Sundays and feast days until midnight. This included all kinds of restaurants, taverns, and other places that the nobility usually avoided. Many of these establishments relied on itinerant musicians rather than stable orchestras, and as a rule of thumb, the lower their social status, the more likely it was that they only played German dances, including forbidden variants such as the Langaus. The social status of all these dances was represented by Mozart in the famous ball scene from the first act of his opera Don Giovanni. The ball begins with a minuet, which is danced on stage only by the noble characters. Soon after, Don Giovanni, the astray nobleman, asked for a dance with the peasant Zerlina as an excuse to lead her off stage and assault her. The music was the contradance, a symbolic link between upper and lower classes. Meanwhile, Leporello, Don Giovanni's servant, distracts Zerlina's boyfriend Masetto, who is already suspicious, by dancing with him a fast spinning dance. You guessed right, the German dance. The genius of the scene is that Mozart manages to make all 3 dances sound at the same time. The chaotic result masterfully reflects, in my opinion, the increasing state of confusion and helplessness of Zerlina and Masetto right before Don Giovanni's attack. Let's test what we learned today. The following 4 dances will be played next in a random order. The first person who gets them right in the comment section will be mentioned in my next video on this topic. Ready? That's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, consider supporting me on Patreon for more content like this. Thanks for watching and see you next time.